Humans of the Cardboard, Photon Hypernova is right around the corner. We're going to be getting the final reveals later this week. Excited to see what's going on there. So stay tuned Thursday and Friday when I cover the new cards as they come out and get released. But as for today, we're talking about the brand new generic cards that actually showcase in Photon Hypernova. Every time we get a core set, there's... even if they're not completely generic, any single deck can play them. There always tends to be like a handful of solid, just somewhat generic cards, whether it applies to an entire type, you know what I mean, sub-type of deck. There's like some really cool cards here and there, but of course we have some high-end ones as well. So we're going to be going through those today, just in case if you are just curious about the more generic side of the set. Let's get into it. We've got a handful of cards to get through. First off, we start with some insect support. We start with Tree Crown Armperer Begram. Really cool level 9 boss monster insect. He can banish 3 insect and or plants from hand or grave to summon himself. Once per turn, he can just destroy all monsters on the field except for insects and plants. And he also keeps your opponent from being able to like respond to you know, your spell and trap effects with monster effects. So, you know, kind of cool. But he's also 3,400, applies a ton of pressure that way. It's a really good card. So, you know, overall, I think it's a really interesting monster, especially with, like, Bee Trooper, you know what I mean? Resonance Insect just searches this guy pretty easily. The Banishing has synergy there as well. It's just a good generic insect boss monster. Could come up for multiple decks down the line. We also have Hexenringe Master Fairy, just a good insect and or plant extender. It itself is an insect, but it just needs any insect or plant in grave to summon itself. And it's a tuner as well, so just a really good you know, tuner extender. I made a video about that a couple days ago, talking about how Konami's kind of been making just like really good tuner cards. They're just good extenders now. They're just good starters now. Just good tuners all around. From there, we move to the last insect card. It's Giant Ball Shoot. This is just Monster Reborn, but for insects. Once per turn, during your main phase, if this card is activated this turn, you can special summon a level 6 or lower insect from grave. It also gives you the potential to lower an opponent's monster, or I'm sorry, switch control of 2 monsters on a later turn. You can't do both effects the same turn, but gives you some decent value down the line to be able to like swap monsters with your opponent, take something more valuable, and then a weak little insect you give them. It's pretty cool. So yeah, a couple of just nice insect cards overall. Still need to see a legit like game plan for insects, you know, down the line, but like some nice tools that could come up for sure. Moving on, we move to some you know, Albaz stuff. I guess technically this one is Cartesia stuff. This card makes Cartesia a super interesting card in a handful of different decks. Cartesia pretty much is a walking polymerization. It's also a quick effect polymerization, and as long as you have a light or a dark, you can go ahead and make Grand Guignol. I already made a whole separate video specifically for this card. On summon, this card bins any level 6 or higher light or dark monster from deck or extra deck, so really good potential like effects that you can definitely get easily off of that. And then it also gives you the ability to special summon a Dogmatica straight from deck or Despia monster from your extra deck whenever your opponent summons a monster via monster effect. That's really, really good. In the next set, we actually get a new Despia extra deck monster that makes this effect even better. But even right now, it's like still pretty solid. So really, really cool. I know a handful of decks that are already going to be able to take advantage of Cartesia like really well because of this card. And I actually can't wait to see what kind of spice people come up with. For sure. Another branded card, which is pretty interesting. It targets a fusion monster on field or in either graveyard, and it returns it to the extra deck. Then you can special summon an Albaz from grave and a monster from your opponent's grave to their field, which is kind of cool. So essentially just kind of a compulse, you know, for fusion monsters. It's a quick play, which is pretty solid. I could even see this seeing generic play in specific formats where like a fusion deck is just so obscenely crazy. I mean, why play Compulse, which might be a little bit too slow, and you could play a card like this, which versus something like Tyr, you just clear their fusion monsters off the field with this immediately, and even going first is a pretty good interruption. I could see this actually seeing play just because it's a solid quick play. in the alabaster stuff could just be a bonus if you're actually going to play it in a branded deck where you want to search it out. So that's kind of cool. I could actually see this card coming up either in branded decks, maybe it's a sideable one of because it'll be searchable, or even in specific formats where there's a really good fusion deck that if you have a bad matchup against, this could be one of the better cards first or second versus a deck like that. So pretty cool. Next up, we have Dynamond. This is actually a generic link, a link monster that ends up being generic ritual support. It takes any 2 monsters, including a ritual. So you do have to use a ritual to make him, but if he's special summoned, you can target a card on the field and a ritual monster in grave, shuffle both cards into the deck. That's pretty good. Just making this card, you get to like shuffle a card on your opponent's field back into the deck. You do have to shuffle a ritual into your back into the deck as well, but you know, as long as that's not detrimental to your strategy, like that actually could be pretty cool. And then he has a quick effect as well where you can tribute him to target a ritual in grave and either add it to your hand or special summon it. So there's some really cool ritual monsters that can either trigger when they're special summoned or just something like a herald. You know what I mean? Just getting a herald back is pretty powerful, or just adding something back to hand for later turn follow-up can also be very good. I also like that this card just does that shuffle effect on special. So if you're able to like get this out later on, it's just on summon. So pretty cool there as well. I can even see him coming up in like an actual Cyber deck because there's some Cyber support that's like also kind of ritual based. Kind of weird, but yeah. Moving on. This is going to be like the more generic part of the video. Those ones, you know, ritual, fusion hate, insect support, right? This is where we're going to get a little more generic here. Weight measuring is a pretty powerful trap card in the set. It says if your opponent has at least two or more monsters than you do, they must send monsters they control to the graveyard, so they control only one. I don't personally love this card, but I've seen it already see a little play in the OCG. It's a pretty good trap card for going second or even going first, letting your opponent commit to the field and commit. And once they have 3, maybe 4 monsters, force them to send everything. It works like evenly. They have to send monsters, so they're not even losing the monsters via card effects. So even tier limit cards wouldn't even be triggering off of this. So it's an interesting card, but I just don't love that they get to just keep the best monster on their field. If we got to pick the monster, it's different, but they get to pick which one they keep, which just means it could be very suboptimal in a handful of circumstances, but still a very interesting card nonetheless for trap lovers. Next up here we have Ice Jade Azurine Ymir. This card is technically water support, so I could have technically thrown it before, but I think water is a bigger subtype than some of the other ones we talked about earlier. But it's a 10 that only needs a water tuner, and then the other non-tuners are completely generic, so pretty easy to make. We're going to get an extender, an Ice Jade extender in the next set, Cyberstorm Access, that makes this card way easier to get into super quickly. This card essentially has a non-targeting banish if it responds to a card that's activating, which is very, very cool. And then also it makes like all face-up monsters you control unable to be destroyed or banished by your opponent's cards for the rest of the turn. That's pretty powerful as well. And then also it floats. Like if it's in grave and anything is banished by an opponent's card effect, you get to summon it back. So pretty cool. 3k beater, just a good, honest option. Like, you know, there's a world where like you could argue in certain scenarios this is a better level 10 synchro than something like what's his face, Cheng Ying, in certain scenarios. Not saying every scenario, but certain scenarios, certainly. This card could just be straight up better than him. Very cool. Moving on here, we go to Gigantic Champion Sargus. This is kind of like a generic Exceed support card in a way, because it's a little bit specific. It needs to work in certain kinds of decks, but listen, this card can just be slapped on any Springen's Exceed, so that means any deck that can make a rank 4 can just make Springen's Merrymaker, and then you can just immediately slap Sargus on top of that. I think we might already see that, see immediate play in something like Earth Machine, because they can make rank 4s early in their combos, as well as maybe we could see it in even like with the Super Heavy Samurai stuff, makes a rank 4 monster pretty easily as well. But on summon, or I'm sorry, just once per turn, if this card has material, you can add a Springen's or Therian card from deck to hand. The Springen thing isn't that important. That's just more in archetype. But the fact that this gives you access to a very generic, very abusable Therion engine, while only needing you to really play a very small count, you could play one field spell, one Regulus, you could play just one Regulus even, and it means you don't have to like commit to the bricky side of Therions and play a bunch of them, but as long as your deck can like put a machine engrave, Therion is going to be live to summon out Regulus and go ahead and add a negate to your board, maybe insulate your plays from interruption. Very, very cool. On top of that, it says if any material is detached from any monster on the field, you can target a card on the field and either destroy it or return it to the hand. So in an Exceed-based deck, if you could put another Exceed on the field next to this guy that can fire on the opponent's turn, something like Abyss Dweller, which can, like, you know what I mean, be fired anytime and then go ahead and get an extra removal out of it, that could be really cool. So really cool guy. He's also 2,800, kind of helps you make good Zeus plays as well. It's a very, very interesting card that could end up making Therion Regulus like really good in a couple different machine decks. Next up, we move to Leviathan Generator, Boss of Shadows. This is the best generic rank 9 in the game. Now that True King of All Calamities is banned, this one now becomes the best rank 9 in the game. So I think this is actually a pretty interesting engine, or not even engine, but package for Virtual World, because they make rank 9s pretty efficiently. But this card is like a non-target. Take any 2 cards from field or grave and attach it to a generator as material, which is very cool. It actually tributes itself and then summons the other generator. That's the only downside. You'd have to allocate 2 extra deck slots for this, but it is a really powerful interruption for sure. So I definitely think it could see play in some specific decks. There. Second to last card here, Bestial Baldrake. We know what the Bestials do. We know how they roll. This now becomes probably the third best Bestial, but there's an argument that in certain scenarios it's just straight up better than Drua's Worm. But this card has the basic Bestial scenario. It's DD Crow on a 2500 body, but when he's on the field, if your opponent special summons a Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Exceed, and or Link monster, you contribute one other light or dark monster to target one of those summoned monsters and banish it. So it has the benefit of just being like a banish if your opponent attempts to summon into either any extra deck mechanic or rituals, which is very, very cool. That can just straight up be insane, and it makes seeing multiple Bestials, if he is one of them, really good as well, especially with Drua's Worm, because that means you could like DD Crow them twice with each one. Then when they summon from extra deck, you could Baldrake tribute Drua's Worm to banish the monster summoned. Then you could use Drua's Worm engrave to send another card. So those 2 in hand is like 4 interruptions, which is insane. I think this card is going to help a lot of decks be even better at combating Tier. But of course, when Tier leaves the format, the Bestials become a lot less generically applicable to the format. So we'll see, but still a really good card nonetheless. And the last card of course, and the chase card of the set, hands down, Triple Tactic Tasking. This card's going to be a pretty penny, I would guess, and probably the most sought after card in the entire set. It's kind of like Triple Tactics Talents. It needs your opponent to activate a monster effect before you can activate it in a turn, but it sets any normal spell or trap from the deck. They can't be activated that turn unless your opponent currently controls a monster. In which case you could add the card to the hand instead, which means adding any normal spell, it would be activatable at that point. So going first, it gives you the ability to find like really powerful blowout normal traps to help just kind of seal up wins guaranteed. As well as going second, if when your opponent obviously would have a monster, you're able to find board breakers, certain engine cards at times that allow you to play through interruption and play that way. So I think with this card being released into the format, I think we will see a drop in Triple Tactics Talent seeing play, but I do think we'll see a fair amount of it seeing play at 1, because obviously if you could set any normal trap, if this card was live, Tactics would have been live as well, so then Tactics would be able to fire guaranteed anyway. So that's really cool. Really powerful card overall. It's going to give a lot of decks access to cards that they did not previously have like very privy access to. They just kind of had to hard draw, and allows you to play a lot of powerful one-ofs because this card can kind of utility those cards out and make use of them exactly when you need them. ideally, as long as your opponent's going to give you a way to trigger it. So very, very cool card. Very interesting to see the ways people try to implement this. And honestly, all of these cards, I think there's potential for a lot of these cards to see play down the line, whether it's specific decks, whether it's like taskings. They could be a lot of different decks. So many decks could actually end up playing this, or Baldric. That's probably just going to be thrown into a lot of people's side deck bestial package, or even main deck as well. There's a lot to be seen here. So really solid set, honestly, as far as like the handful of like more generic cards go. There's obviously a lot of archetypal support in here as well, so definitely check those out if you're interested in that stuff. I can't wait to bring you the news that we get in the next couple of days. But yeah, hopefully you like this video. Let me know your thoughts down below on the new cards. What are you most excited to make use of, and in what? I'd love to hear your ideas as far as these cards go. But I'm out of here for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.